The way we tell the Christmas story in books and movies and pageants is really sweet, but we have a tendency to lump a lot of details together. Just as a refresher, our earliest gospel, Mark, does not mention Jesus' birth. John's gospel is the latest, and its prologue reads much more like a poem than a history textbook. Paul Lehman preached a wonderful sermon based upon the opening lines of John this past Sunday. So it's in these middle two Gospels, Matthew and Luke, that we find stories about the Nativity. Luke tells a very familiar story about Mary and Joseph traveling to take part in the census. His story features Gabriel, the shepherds, a manger. This may surprise you, but Matthew does not talk about any of this. Part of Matthew's story is featured this morning during our celebration of Epiphany. Another quick reminder, Christmas is a season that lasts for 12 days, and it ends on 12th night, or Epiphany Eve. The next day is Epiphany, January 6th, and that's when we celebrate the arrival of the wise men. Because January 6th falls on a weekday, we're observing Epiphany this morning. Back where I come from in Louisiana, Epiphany is a really big deal because it signifies the beginning of Mardi Gras. When we lived in New Orleans, we would celebrate Epiphany at the Episcopal Cathedral and then walk out to St. Charles Avenue and watch the first Mardi Gras crew ride by on a streetcar. They were known as the Funny 40 Fellows. And from that moment through Fat Tuesday, there would be nonstop king cakes, beads, parades. I think we went to 16 parades last year. We still missed out on plenty. But back to the business at hand. There's a few things I want to point out about this morning's gospel. For one, the story about the wise men is only found in Matthew. And if you take another look at it, you'll notice that Matthew never calls them kings. We seem to have added that detail. He also doesn't say there are only 3 of them, though somewhere along the line we came up with that number. Some traditions even give them names, Melchior, Gaspar, and Balthazar, which are some pretty amazing monikers, whether they're fictional or not. As Matthew tells it, these non-Jewish wisdom seekers are sent by the Jewish ruler Herod to search for Jesus, a child whom Herod fears will challenge his power. A star famously leads the wise men to Jesus and his family, where they offer him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They are warned in a dream not to return to Herod, and so the wise men leave via a different route. If you were to continue reading, you would learn that Herod is furious about this. He feels like the wise men have tricked him, and as a result, he orders all children under the age of 2 who live around Bethlehem to be killed. Jesus and his family end up fleeing to Egypt for safety, and they don't return until after Herod's death. That's quite the story, with some really dark overtones. And yet it also provides some incredible food for thought. For instance, these wise men are famously guided by a star. How do we know which stars to follow along our own journeys? And then how do we discern when we need to change course and leave in a different direction? Along these same lines, the root word of epiphany is epiph, which is Greek for to shine or to manifest. How is God epiphing or shining or becoming manifest in our lives? That's always a pertinent question to ask. The detail I want to focus on this morning, however, is that this story is radically inclusive of outsiders. For your reference, we believe that Matthew, the author of this gospel, was Jewish. But again, these wise men are not. A fact, I believe, that sets a tone from the very beginning that the arc of Jesus' life will be one of radical inclusion. You know, we human beings seem to have an implicit desire to categorize one another, make people feel other, like their humanity is not as valued. This is deeply embedded in our culture. We dehumanize each other based upon things like race, sexual orientation, gender identification, political party, income, zip code. I'll never forget a story that a friend shared about filling out paperwork not long after he arrived at college. His family is descendant from Asia, but from a country that Americans don't tend to think of as being quote-unquote Asian. He grew up in a religious family, but he himself did not personally identify as being religious. So after checking all of the boxes on this form to the best of his abilities, he received a letter from his college that read something like this: "Welcome to X college. Based on your self-identification, you are an other, non-Protestant. We will do our best to match you with groups that reflect your other, non-Protestant identity." It is so important that we learn to see each other in public and private settings. When we refuse to see one another, we lessen one another's humanity. I think it's both subversive and incredibly consequential that Matthew is inclusive of these people from outside the Jewish community right from the get-go. This, to me, says that radical inclusivity is woven into the DNA of Christianity. No one is left out. There's room for everyone. The power of seeing yourself as a part of the story should never be underestimated. In a really touching video posted to YouTube not long before he was installed as our presiding bishop, Michael Curry tells a story about his parents while they were dating. His mother, who was Episcopalian, brought his father, a Baptist preacher, to an Episcopal church with her on a Sunday morning. This was in the 1940s. When Bishop Curry's mother went to receive communion, his father stayed back in the pew. They were the only African-American couple in the congregation, and his father was curious what was about to happen. He had never seen black people and white people drink from the same water fountain, let alone from the same cup. So the priest came by and gave the bread to Bishop Curry's mom, and then a few moments later, she was offered the chalice. Bishop Curry remembers his dad saying years later that any church where black and white can drink from the same cup has discovered something that I want to be a part of and that the world needs to learn about. This is the sacrament of unity, he continued, that can overcome the deepest estrangements between human beings. Presiding Bishop Curry's father saw himself in the story. And I know we're not sharing communion at this particular moment, but when we're able to gather around this table again, we will have a precious responsibility to open our doors wide to our Capitol Hill neighborhood. This is God's table, not ours. All people are welcome here. It doesn't matter what you do for a living or what you look like or what boxes you check when you have to fill out paperwork. There is room for everyone in our community. Every single person has a place in God's story. Happy Epiphany, everyone. In the name of God. Amen.